Hi, my name is Enilda Romero-Hall, and I am an associate professor in learning design and technology at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Welcome to our presentation. The title of our presentation is Critical Conversations in Online Education, a deep dive into the Feminist Pedagogy for Teaching Online book. This presentation is an opportunity to share about the Feminist Pedagogy for Teaching Online edited volume that will be published by Athabasca University Press. It is a collaboration between Jacqueline Tony Howard, Claire Daniel, Naya Bond, Liv Newman, and myself. It is also a collaboration with scholars from around the world who share their intellectual contributions related to research on feminist pedagogy, as well as the application of feminist pedagogy in online and digital environments. The edited volume includes 14 different chapters. It also includes an introduction chapter and a conclusion chapter. The 14 chapters are divided into 4 different sections. Each section has a specific theme, and in section 1, the theme is promoting connections, reflexivity, and embodiment. Section 2 focuses on building equity, cooperation, and co-education. Section 3 focuses on creating cultures of care in online classrooms. Section 4 focuses on interrogating knowledge production, social inequality, and power. In this presentation, you will hear from book chapter authors and editors. Naya Bond will discuss the introduction chapter titled Priorities of Praxis Using Feminist Pedagogy to Reimagine Online Classrooms. Bridget Kreiner will discuss Chapter 5, Building Participatory Spaces in Online Classrooms. Ashley Glassburn will discuss Chapter 7, Consciousness Raising and Trauma-Informed Practice. Nandita Gurjar will discuss Chapter 9, Humanizing Online Learning with Feminist Pedagogy. Nadia Jaramillo Cherres will discuss Chapter 11, Care, Identity, and Empowerment in Emergency Remote Teaching. And I will discuss the conclusion chapter titled Online Feminist Pedagogy, Future Learning Experiences Speculated.
Hi everyone, I'm Naya Bond. Like many of you, I'm doing a lot of things in higher ed at the moment. I'm an online educator, faculty developer, writer who often writes about my online teaching and learning experiences, and a PhD student studying online faculty development and support. I'm also a co-author and editor of this book that I'm excited to talk to you today about, Feminist Pedagogy for Teaching Online. Now, this book came about through the collaborative efforts of a Feminist Pedagogy for Teaching Online collective that initially started working together in the fall of 2020 and the spring of 2021, when 2 of our first members, Jackie and Claire, were tasked with developing resources around online teaching stemming from the need of instructors who had been placed in the online environment during the onset of the COVID pandemic. That opportunity to collect those resources and think critically about what it means to teach and learn in that environment presented lots of opportunities to address misconceptions about what that looks like, to talk about challenges associated with teaching and learning in that modality or modalities, and to also prioritize the positives and possibilities of being in that space and place. Now, when the pandemic hit, most instructors, by the very fact that they had to pivot so quickly, simply kind of transferred face-to-face or on-site pedagogy and curriculum to the online environment. Again, it was called emergency remote teaching, so there wasn't necessarily a ton of time for intentionality. It was a quick pivot. Everyone was just doing the best that they could with the moment that they were facing. But in that moment, those possibilities that I talked about earlier were emerging, and the idea that something more transformative could be possible was percolating. So, what does the introduction talk about and how does it fit with that context? Well, the introduction introduces us, by way of its very name, to a little bit of history about how feminist pedagogy came about. Now, for some, it may be uncomfortable, but it's absolutely necessary to recognize that educational institutions have been powerful tools of oppression for centuries. Now, that doesn't mean that they haven't also been places of emancipation and empowerment. That paradox can exist at the same time. But the reality is that from residential schools to eliminate indigenous cultures to systemic exclusions that have marginalized Black, immigrant, and other communities, education has maybe too often been a mechanism of control rather than liberation. And during the 19th and 20th centuries, national governments used standardized educational systems to entrench oppressive social norms around race, gender, class, and other identities. And even as social movements like the Civil Rights Movement and Women's Lib emerged that challenged these structures, educational institutions still remained deeply resistant to change. And the move to online education presented a kind of paradox that existed within that resistance to change. So here was a technology that had the potential to democratize learning, providing access to those who may have traditionally been excluded from higher ed, yet it was being built around the same foundations, the same kind of hierarchical top-down approaches of the traditional classroom. And this book and the initiatives around it is a direct challenge to that approach. So feminist pedagogy is a teaching movement, but it's also so much more than that movement. It's a radical reimagining of education. It's about dismantling hierarchies, breaking down the walls between teacher and student, recognizing that knowledge isn't something that's handed down from on high, but it's something that's co-created together. It's about understanding that every student, every learner brings invaluable experiences and expertise to the learning process. And that sounds a little radical because it is. It essentially means reimagining the role of an educator and the role of education at large. So when we are talking about feminist pedagogy, we're talking about moving away from that idea of sage on the stage where the educator is the only expert in the room and the spotlight is on them and no one else speaks or contributes. We're moving towards what is called the guide on the side. Instead of lecturing, which yes, does still have a place in feminist pedagogy in some contexts, we're facilitating experiences, reflections, ways of thinking. We're creating spaces where students aren't passive recipients of information, but active creators of knowledge. Now that's great in theory, but what about practicality? So part of the introduction and the rest of the book is setting up the premise for those practical terms. So what does that look like? It might look like in some chapters collaborative discussion boards where students engage with each other's ideas eagerly and enthusiastically. It might mean course policies that recognize a student's full humanity, a holistic look at the learner, their challenges, their lived experiences, the context that they're being educated in. It involves technology that enhances connection rather than creating distance. But with all that positive potential, it's important to be clear that None of this is about creating a utopian classroom. There are always going to be power dynamics in education, at least as education looks now. And we're not totally erasing hierarchies. That's not possible. We are attempting to make them more transparent, more flexible, and to build more responsiveness and freedoms within them. And our current moment really demands this approach. We're facing rising fascism, environmental crises, attacks on reproductive rights, and technological shifts that can either liberate or fully oppress. And in this context, education isn't just about transferring information. It's about developing critical thinking, building empathy, creating agents of social change, creating connection, creating opportunities for collaboration. And the introduction chapter to this book helps us explore all of that, explore how to build equitable online spaces, how to use technology intentionally, how to create cultures of care. But more than specific techniques, we're also creating philosophical threads to help us understand how what we're putting into practice is a way of seeing and transforming education into a collaborative process. So, to everyone watching, this is your invitation, whether you're designing a new online course, reimagining an existing one, you have the power to make learning a space of genuine connection, mutual respect, and collective growth. Online education isn't just a technology shift, it's a chance to rebuild educational spaces from the ground up, more just, more inclusive, more human spaces and interactions. This is our moment, and this book is going to help us all seize it.
Hi, my name is Bridget Kreiner, and I am a professor of English and Women's and Gender Studies at Cuyahoga Community College in Cleveland, Ohio. I am also the author of Chapter 5 in Feminist Pedagogy for Teaching Online. The title of my chapter is Building Participatory Spaces in Online Classrooms. What led me to want to write this chapter is because of my own journey. I have always identified myself as a feminist. And so when I studied education for my PhD, I became very interested in collaborative learning and specifically feminist pedagogy. So when I began teaching English, specifically initially in community college, I focused a great deal on implementing feminist pedagogy during my face-to-face classes. When I moved to teaching more online, I found that it was difficult to fully engage in the same level of feminist pedagogy approaches and collaborative learning techniques, and that it was more difficult to build community and foster co-creation of knowledge among my students. And so I started to investigate ways that I could enact that in my online teaching. And it took me quite a while to find ways that I felt comfortable with teaching online, that I felt engaged my students in the same ways that I could enact feminist pedagogy in my classroom when I taught in a face-to-face situation. So the techniques that I discuss in my chapter focus specifically on how to build community using formative assessments in online teaching. And so I focus here on three different techniques or three different approaches using three different types of tools in my online teaching. The first of these tools is broadly social annotation. And social annotation is a type of platform that allows students to um, annotate either web pages or texts that you provide to them. There are three, but there are more, but three that I mention as examples are genius, apotheosis, and perusal. And like I said, these social annotation tools allow students to annotate text on either a web page or a document. They can reply and have a discussion using these annotations or the annotations posted by other students or by me as the faculty member. These platforms also allow students to embed media, such as hyperlinks and images, and to very often use audio or video in lieu of just text-based annotation. What I have really appreciated about social annotation in my online teaching is its capacity to foster discussion inside of the text. As a person that teaches English, I like to have my students in my face-to-face class take out their book, look at the reading that I've assigned, and to point to specific places in the text that support their comments or arguments. This is much more difficult to do in a discussion online. And so social annotation allows this to take place in contact with the text, which I think is really important. And it fosters that community building and conversation where students are actually very engaged with the text itself and conversing about the text in a much more tangible way than a traditional discussion board. The second group of tools that I discuss in my chapter are what I classify as interactive video. The one I use primarily, the tool I am most familiar with is one called PlayPosit. But is another tool that I understand is similar, Panato, that I mentioned. What PlayPosit and Panato, or these types of interpolated videos, is they're ways to enrich video content. And you can use video content that either you are self-recording a lecture or open source recordings like TED Talks or YouTube videos. You can upload those into the interpolated video tool, and it allows you to add activities throughout the videos, such as questions, either multiple choice questions, small discussion questions that students can respond to, additional information or web links, and other types of comments within the playback of the video. Why I find this really useful is that I also like to show video. I teach film on occasion, and I use film a lot in my courses. And so when I am able to add comments and questions, it really mirrors how I would teach in person in a way that is much more interactive. So if I was teaching, standing in front of a course, I might stop the video and ask a question to the class for discussion, or I may just insert a piece of information that might be useful for them to provide more context. And so those tools are very, very useful. Another way that I have handled using interpolated video is just to simply record a lecture, with or without PowerPoint slides, but just explaining a concept. And then I can add checkpoints and interactions throughout that lecture, that video lecture, so that it is more engaging and that I am able to assess students' understanding by their responses to the discussions and multiple choice questions throughout the video. The last grouping of tools that I discuss in my chapter are wikis. People are often familiar with wikis. They are useful in collaborating on the generation of written content and to allow students to collaboratively write and create other written content. It allows really for a deep level of knowledge co-creation and community, as these are collaborative activities. In most learning management systems, wikis are a tool that is available. I've used them to implement a variety of assignment types for both shorter projects and longer, more complicated ones. So that is the basic overview of my chapter. I want to note that I made a lot of comparisons to my in-person teaching and my online teaching. And I just want to say that I think I don't think it's a one-to-one translation, as I have noted in my chapter. But these were very useful frameworks in trying to find the same types of formative assessment and community building techniques that I found very useful in online teaching, and wanting to find ways that would similarly engage students and that would be interactive, allowing them to interact with me and interact with other students in the class in ways that were not simply just a quiz on a reading or a response to a discussion board post. So I'm very proud and happy to be a part of this publication, and also to share this information, because these are things that it took me a long time to learn and to find out about. And when I was able to share that knowledge through the chapter, I am very, very happy to have been a part of it.
Nila Miyamiya, Owemakeke Shibakanake. Hi, my name is Dr. Ashley Glassburn. I'm a member of the Miami Nations of Indians of Indiana and an associate professor at the University of Windsor in Ontario, Canada. Thank you for having me here. I'm going to talk to you today about how I designed an online course around consciousness raising. Well, consciousness raising is often understood as this process in which people share their own experiences with each other, and by hearing each other's stories, they come to see the structures of society, the forces that shape their own decision-making and circumstances. This requires a lot of sharing, a lot of trust, and a lot of kind of features of online learning that are rare in online spaces, especially when they can feel very alienating. The course I was moving online was called Women in Friendship. And so it was important to me for students to learn how to practice the skills of friendship and thinking about how they can build community, trust, and relations online. To do so, I used models from trauma-informed practice to think about how you can build trust and responsibility within a group so that when difficult topics arise, people have skills and trust already in place in order to support and care for each other in that moment. So the course is 100 to 150 students per session, and it's offered about 3 times a year. So it's a large online course. In this course, to make those kinds of relationships be able to be born, I break students out into small groups and I run the course in a completely flipped model. What that means is that students do the readings and they watch a pre-recorded video lecture at home before class. And then we use all of class time, which is about 3 hours a week in person, meeting in their groups and doing the intellectual work together. That can be a lot of time to spend in an online room, talking with other people. And to facilitate this, I break the course out into a series of processes so that there is variation throughout that 3 hour period. And all of it is built around students directly engaging each other and building relationships. So when they first log in, the first step of every class period is they sign up for different roles that they're going to play in class. That can be like recording time and making sure that they're staying on track to finish the work before class ends. It can also be recording group discussions or facilitating the conversation to make sure everybody's participating. The second step is really important, and I call it the welcoming circle. In the welcoming circle, in all of the activities that are called circles in the class, students take turns one by one going around and answering a question. Very importantly, they're not allowed to comment or make noises or or really like ask follow-up questions. The point of the circle isn't to have a group conversation, because group conversations often are organized around the people who speak the most. And so some people are heard and some people are not heard. A circle discussion is where everybody has their own individual time to talk. And so everybody has to practice the skills of sharing, which some people are more comfortable with than others, and keeping their mouth shut and listening, which also some people are more comfortable than others. And so the welcoming circle asks a series of questions that are kind of artly designed. Because the purpose of the welcoming circle is actually to build the foundations of their relationships and learn how to share with each other. Students online do not automatically trust each other, or even enter into group projects online with good faith. And so to build that faith amongst each other, the welcoming circle questions ask them to answer pretty simple, banal questions about their lives. And so the kind of art to this is that you don't want to ask questions where students feel like they need to perform or get the right answer. The moment they feel like they have to get the right answer or perform, they feel like it's not about just being open with each other. It's actually about like accomplishing something. And that is not the kind of how you build a relationship with each other. And so it's important to ask questions such as like, what most recently made you laugh out loud? A question like that has people think in their memory and just share that experience. It doesn't need to be complicated. They don't need to choose a special thing. It's just like what happened most recently. It also reduces anxiety because they don't need to like perform an answer. Whereas a question like, tell us something interesting about yourself, that kind of question doesn't give a lot of guidance. And some students find those questions a lot more challenging to answer. And instead of answering something that feels honest or authentic to themselves, they try to find answers that they think will impress the other people in the group, or maybe even impress the instructor. And so it's important to ask questions that are easily answered from memory, where they reveal aspects of themselves that are true, like minor vulnerabilities along the way, without feeling like they're giving away too much or being forced to share information that they are not ready to share with people. These basic exchanges over time, week by week, end up building a sense of security and trust, a sense that they know each other and they understand something about each other's values, and ultimately is the foundation of building a safe feeling, communicative relationship with each other. So we start with the welcome circle, and then we move on to a reading check-in. And I keep these separate so that when people are talking about how much of the reading they did and what they got out of the reading, that can be quite performative at times. So we want to keep that conversation separate from the conversation where we're trying to build trust and just being open. So we go around the circle and they share how much of the reading they did and what they got out of it, and then talk about why maybe they didn't get all the reading done, or maybe why they skimmed over part of the reading. And then that gives them a chance to also help each other problem shoot why they're not getting the reading done or how they might be able to do it better. And so that again is about laying a sense of trust and foundation, where they share where they are coming from and how much of the reading they did, so that then they can have an open conversation where they don't have to kind of like pretend they did the reading. They can just be like, I really only read half of it and I don't know what happened at the end and I'm really sorry. That allows them to have a more fruitful, honest conversation for the rest of the class. The next stage is where they start doing the real intellectual work of the class. I have different activities that I use for that. Sometimes they're more creative activities, like if we're reading a novel, I might have them do like a casting call and think about the different characters, who would play them, what characteristics do you absolutely have to capture this character on screen. And it's just a way of getting students to like really think through what they're learning in the book, right? But a lot of times what it is, I often teach a series of essays. And so a lot of times I do a form of online pair and share. A traditional parent share in a face-to-face class can look like two students sharing their opinion on something or what they got out of the reading, and then they kind of like talk about it a little bit and maybe report to the class about their conversation. And so it allows them to both have opinions and share, but then also present something to the group. With this, the groups are often made up of 5 to 8 students. And so the online parent share takes place in the LMS, the learning software system, where they're able to type and see each other typing at the same time. And so I have a first set of questions where everybody shares. And in those, there's a series of prompts, maybe 3 or 4 questions, and every single person is typing in a different color or a different font so that they can tell who's typing what, and they just type out their responses. This allows them to get their own thoughts and opinions and perspectives out, share it with the group, and then they can read each other's, comments pretty quickly. The second set of questions requires them to create real synthesis and group answers to the questions. And so that allows them to really it allows me to ask harder questions than I would normally ask an individual student. And it also allows them to think through the tensions between each other's experiences. We wrap up the class with a closing circle so that we return that circle of trust. And over the course of the semester, I feel like students can really create a sense of safety and trust with each other to deal with hard conversations about race, racism, violence, abuse, the kinds of questions that we are often hesitant to have students have with each other when we're not kind of facilitating the conversation. And so I hope that you find this model useful. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Nandita Gurjar, and I am going to be talking about my chapter that I co-wrote with my daughter, Priya Gurjar, on humanizing online learning using feminist pedagogy. So we took on our author's positionality was intergenerational, interdisciplinary perspective as mother and daughter team. Our passion and admiration for the work of Patricia Hill Collins and Gloria and Zaldua is reflected in our work. The chapter, in our chapter, we focused on applying tenets of feminist pedagogy to online praxis to humanize online learning. The first tenet is ethics of care. And ethics of care consists of 3 interrelated components: personal expressiveness, emotions, and empathy. And weaving those in our social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence builds models of care, connection, and community in online learning. Next, we talk about the value of lived experiences in online learning. It honors the dignity and experiences of learners. Feminism considers that all knowledge is partial and it is situated in specific contexts. So we need to structure our discourse to learn from others as access to better understanding. Some examples of subjugated knowledge validation process in online learning that is valued is on oral storytelling of cultural stories, cultural proverbs, translanguaging, oral history interviews, quilt making, kitchen table conversations, and indigenous arts, craft, poetry, music. These are not included in the dominant discourse, but feminism values these subjugated knowledge validation processes, and we talk about those in our chapter. We specifically focus on photo voice for honoring lived experiences in online learning. And it is through the dialogic conversation between the research participant, between the learner and the instructor, that we get to know more about their contexts, their affordances, and limitations, constraints in their contextual setting. So it basically focuses on a photograph. What do you see here? The photograph is generated basically by the learner. They are the ones who take the pictures of what interests them. And then what do you see here? What is happening here? So it honors their perspectives. How does it relate to our lives? Why does this particular situation exist and what we can do about it? And we talk more about in the context of Iranian protests using this picture. Personal accountability in self-advocacy and self-care in online praxis is the third principle. The purpose of self-care is to balance and harmonize ourselves towards collective freedom as a community. So incorporating creative arts, music, meditation, journaling are some ways to embed self-care in online learning. Yoga is another one of them. So the conclusion is incorporating tenets of feminist theory in online learning humanizes online learning by creating a learning environment that is rooted in ethics of care. Thank you very much.
Welcome to this brief presentation on Chapter 11, Care, Identity, and Empowerment in Emergency Remote Teaching, in the book, Feminist Pedagogy for Teaching Online. My name is Nadia Jaramillo Cherres. I am a Senior Instructional Designer at Oregon State University. The co-author of this chapter is Dr. Enilda Romero-Hall, Associate Professor of Learning Design and Technology at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and a well-known researcher. In recent years, I became more interested in critical pedagogies, including feminist pedagogy, as a framework for re-envisioning learning environments. I view these spaces as opportunities to authentically engage with the students, honoring their experiences, their values, the backgrounds that they bring into the classroom, while also critically examining the ways that the process of teaching and learning happens and the dynamics within those processes, how knowledge is acquired. I'm in the early stages of exploring how feminist pedagogy can inform the design and facilitation of online learning. In the chapter presented here, Dr. Enilda Romero-Hall and I discuss a qualitative study that is informed by the tenets of feminist pedagogy. The literature underscores the fact that, regardless of the modality, a feminist pedagogy approach aims to humanize the learning experience, helping connect academic structures to wider sociopolitical contexts and practices, offering an opportunity to challenge injustices that happen in these spaces. In fact, feminist pedagogy promotes teaching practices that challenge the patriarchal model of education, redefines the instructor-student relationship, examines the power dynamics of that relationship within and outside the classroom, and acknowledges the value in personal and academic backgrounds and lived experiences that students have. The qualitative study that we present in the chapter derived from a larger study we conducted in the early months of emergency remote teaching during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we surveyed 316 instructors in higher education from around the world, and we asked them about their experiences in teaching during these troubling times. We became interested in how instructors humanize emergency remote teaching. In the qualitative study, we present the results of this specific investigation about whether and how academic systems and structures enabled unjust practices during emergency remote teaching. The data comes from 156 instructors who shared their stories through an open-ended question. The data analysis included a priori coding using a codebook that summarized 12 tenets of feminist pedagogy informed by the research literature that we conducted. In addition, the codebook includes the operational definitions that we provided for each of the tenets. And in that way, it informed our process for the data analysis. And here are the instructors' stories. Overall, during the emergency remote teaching, instructors demonstrated genuine care and empathy for others to support student well-being and mental health. Instructors were more understanding and acknowledged the lived experiences through their own vulnerability, understanding that circumstances challenge the way that teaching and life intersected. Instructors also recognized positions of power to make decisions within and outside the learning environment. They rediscovered students' identities and their barriers or opportunities for learning. They also recognized students as individuals that were more than physical or visible digital presences in the classroom. They recognized that students have their own lives. Instructors also built community to ensure connections, show value to students, and promoted belonging within that learning space. Instructors also had realizations that life happens in parallel to academic responsibilities for them, for colleagues, and for other students. Faculty recognize that teaching is a process of mutual support and collaboration, not only with colleagues, but also with the students. Faculty struggled with a lack of leadership while moving towards emergency remote teaching, and also with the greater demands and expectations that were put on the teaching and learning process. Instructors observed students' use of digital technologies and engagement while also struggling with their personal lives. Instructors questioned teaching approaches or deemed them inadequate, especially during emergency remote teaching times where the relationships were affected by the social circumstances. Instructors also provided additional support to wider communities, students not only in their classrooms, but outside the classrooms, those communities that were desperate for help. In our conclusions, we indicate that instructors prioritized care and recognized the diversity of the students' identities and the experiences that they have in and outside the classroom before they even wanted to focus on teaching and learning. Instructors showed genuine care and empathy for their students and for their colleagues as well. Instructors fostered strong human connections that significantly influence the dynamics of the learning environment, being there for students, showing their own vulnerability, knowing that learning and being in community was important, that it fostered a sense of trust and enhanced the relationship with the students. And finally, in our study, we emphasize the importance of supporting instructors beyond academic resources. We need to address the personal, the relational, and the well-being needs of both students and instructors. Thank you for listening to this presentation. I invite you to read our chapter, Care, Identity, and Empowerment in Emergency Remote Teaching.
The goal of this concluding book chapter is to provide a vision for what we hope feminist pedagogy will bring to digital learning experiences, and more specifically, online learning experiences. Research on educational futures can provide a mission, a trajectory for members of educational systems, such as administrators, policymakers, and scholars, for them to consider or to follow. When there is a lack or absence of educational futures, it can be very problematic because it can leave us being pushed in a specific direction or into particular educational practices. It also opens the doors for individuals who are outside education, like politicians or commercial technology companies, to create futuristic visions without taking into considerations the many different factors that actually shape learning and education in the future. So for those reasons, we thought it was important to conclude this edited volume with a chapter that was dedicated to speculative futures. In this book chapter, there are 7 scholars from the education field from around the world, and they share their insights on what we can envision as a future in which feminist digital learning experiences take place. We speculate that future online learning experiences will consider advances in modality, and these advances in modality will include a range of different options, but most importantly will be embedded with accessibility as the norm. Beyond modality, a key speculation relates to online learning environments in the future, influenced by feminist pedagogy tenets, in which there's an increasing and central role of learning networks that are distributed and global, hence leading to more equity, access, and decentralized knowledge hubs. Another central theme in the speculative future of feminist digital learning is the breakdown of power structures. And what do we mean by that? It means breaking down power structures in learning environment design, educational technology selection, and the consumption of digital metadata. In education, instructors, learning designers, and programmers are those who lead the design of learning environments. Ideally, we will move away from learners consuming prepackaged environments such as learning management systems, and instead, scholars speculate that learners will be more involved as designers of the learning ecosystem, giving them an essential role in the decision-making process of how their own learning experiences will occur. In addition, we speculate that a feminist digital learning future will also break down power structures in relation to the instructor's selection and relationship with technology. Today, there are some movements within the education field who are raising awareness about the lack of neutrality in technology. And as scholars, we speculate that instructors will be empowered within their institutions to implement critical intersectional approaches in educational technology use and integration. And from a digital library perspective, scholars speculate a feminist digital learning future in which learners, instructors, and researchers become active digital archivists that break down oppressive structures in library systems and lead to more knowledge democracy. We speculate that our future will no longer scrutinize online learning, and instead it will recognize all our learners as diverse individuals and equal contributors to the learning experience.